We're live.
All right, welcome everyone to the, what is today? February 8th work study meeting in the special school district. Amy, can you call forward? Director Asner?
Present.
Director Byers? Director Faulkner? Director Hudson? Director Moeller?
Here.
Vice President Quattro? Here. And President Cuneo?
Here.
All right, now we will stand for the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. On the agenda today, under 2.01, we will have the public review committee.
Yes. Good evening. Vice President Patras, Dr. Cuneo, Superintendent Keenan, and Board of Directors. I would like to introduce Ms. Keisha Lee. I've had the pleasure of working with our Public Review Committee. If you remember, they're a group that helps identify opportunities and recommendations. Also with Mr. Larry Felton that is sitting here, and also Rob Eaton that is also here. So thank you guys for coming. But here is Ms. Keisha.
Good evening. Just as a brief introduction, the Public Review Committee is made up of appointees from the Department of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education, as well as members of the Governing Council, as well as members of the SSD Parent Advisory Council. The purpose of the PRC was set by state statute, and kind of goes over, instructs us to review the structure, governance, administration, financial management, delivery of services, cooperation with component districts, which we call partner districts, role as an advocate for special needs and severely special needs children, as well as compliance with sections 1.2.850 and 162.859 regarding conflicts and responsiveness to the needs and concerns of citizens of the special school district. So this is happens every 4 years. I've had the pleasure to serve on 2 public review committees. I was part of the 2017 public review committee, as well as the current one. Currently, our committee members consist of the deputy appointees are Dr. Jenny Bender, Dr. Andrew Stewart, Dr. Mary Ann Tejan. The governing council appointees are myself, Ms. Keisha Lee, representing the school district of Mizzou, Mr. Larry Felton, who represents Melville, and Dr. Sheila Powell Walker, who represents Ferguson, Florida. The members of the Parent Advisory Council are Dr. Kamisha Carter, Mr. Rob Eaton, and Ms. Erica Williams. So we have been meeting with members of the Special School District Administration and receiving information, reports, presentations since September. Just to give you an update of what we have received thus far, we have set our own guidelines for establishing a quorum, which consists in ensuring that each member of the appointee group is present at each meeting, so everyone has a voice. We went through and did our schedule. We determined which presentations and speakers we want to hear from the district, and we've also reviewed several documents. On November 15th, we had a presentation on a continuous school improvement plan by Dr. Molly Bolton, as well as the SSD partnership agreement by Shakita McRiddle. On November 29th, we heard a presentation on the equity framework by Dr. Michael Macklin, as well as career technical education and adult education by Mr. Kevin Anders. On November 30th and December 9th, the group split into 2, and we toured the SSD schools at North Tech, Northview, and Ackerman in North County. On December 7th, we heard presentations on employee engagement, as well as human resources by Jennifer Henry and Dan Kelly. Then on January 3rd, we've heard presentations on compliance by Ms. Susan Henry. and the Parent Education and Diversity Awareness presentation by Ms. Latricia Morgan. On January the 12th, the PRC, much as we did today, same presentation presented to the SSD PAC. And then, just on yesterday, we received a presentation from Dr. Pendergrass on the impact of COVID on SSD in 2022. That was a very in-depth conversation. We got to hear the challenges as well as a lot of the work that has been done to continue to be able to serve the students in special school districts. We have some upcoming meetings. On February 25th, we will attend the Regional Superintendent's meeting, as well as on March 7th, we will present to the SSD Governing Council. That is the work that we have done to date. And we would just like to ask you if there's any additional things that you would like for us to delve into in terms of special education.
How are we doing?
So far, so good. But we still have some analysis to do. I mean, it is our responsibility to provide the district with recommendations. As you can look on the website, you see the 2017 recommendations. As members of the Governing Council, we were able to get updates on where we are thus far, and it was very pleasantly surprised and very welcoming to know that many of the recommendations that were made have been adhered to. The one that's top of point for me is equity, and a lot of the equity initiatives came out of that presentation.
Anybody else?
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up for 2.02, HR Advisory Committee.
Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Patras, Board of Directors, Dr. King. I'm Tracy Barroso, Interim Director of Employee Relations. I'm joined tonight with my fellow co-presenters to provide additional updates regarding the proposed changes to the Human Resources Department. These updates are in response to your questions from the last board meeting. Again, tonight's presenters are Dr. Michael Macklin, Director of Equity, Wendy Owens, Assistant Director of Professional Learning, Shante Wakefield, Director of Special Education for Webster Groves, Jennifer Henry, Executive Director of Communications, Kevin Anders, Executive Director of Career Technical Education and College and Career Readiness. Slide, please. As we discussed initially, workers have been quitting their jobs in record numbers created by the pandemic and seeking employment with businesses who have a more employee-focused approach and who are skilled at retaining these employees. It is critical that the Human Resource Department be provided the necessary tools and structure to meet the needs of a multi-generational workforce, remain employee-focused, and continue being responsive and supportive. Feedback solicited by new employees about their onboarding and orientation experience reveals the following strengths and opportunities for improvement. Next slide, please. Additional feedback revealed the need for more training, partner district-specific information, more timely access to technology, and one point of contact in the Human Resources Department. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Macklin.
Can you go back?
Yeah.
Tell me about the Phoenix training prior to starting. We're not all familiar with Phoenix training.
Well, Phoenix training isn't handled through Human Resources. Phoenix training is the, I don't know.
It's the IEP
system. It's the IEP system for our students.
So our teachers go through the training prior to moving into the jobs. We try to get them onboarded in that process as soon as they can so they can access their student files.
Thank you. As we continue to look at the current themes from SSD employee interviews, it's good to know that the themes didn't focus centrally on one person, but the themes focused on the system, right? And so if we go to that slide, which show these themes from the SSD employee interviews, you will see that the themes that came out were centrally focused on the system, which will show that there's definitely a need for system change. This is really the genesis on what brought us here and what brought the committee together to look at analyzing the reorganization. When we go to the next slide, and we see the themes, again, from SSD employee interviews, and these themes really focus on what is the reason that most of the employees contact HR, and then what does HR mean to you? This is a lot of work done by the committee to really delve deep into the reorganization and the issues that thought that could take place to help enhance HR and human resources. And so those two concepts are there, which focus on the reasons to call HR, and then also what does HR mean to you. And then also when we look at employee feedback, which is key, right, especially from HR, and really what are your employees saying? What are they telling us as it relates to HR and the day-to-day operations? The need for cross-training, right? The need for a technology system that enhances what they're able to do, to break down the silos. And again, we're not talking about individuals, but we're talking about enhancing the system. Next will be Dr. Shante Wakefield and Wendy Oates.
Good evening. Next slide, please. So in terms of the HR advisory committee, in terms of identifying what our purpose was, we reviewed, researched, and created recommendations to provide to the superintendent as well as to the Board of Education. The reason for the change is to improve our employee engagement, our recruitment, our retention, and to ultimately build a meaningful culture within that's inclusive in the district. Next slide, please. The mission and vision that we have for the department, it defines the objectives and the approach that we're going to utilize in order to reach our objectives. Next slide, please. Our vision statement. The district wants, this is the statement, the vision that the district wants us to see overall. It's what our desired future should look like. The vision focuses on the employee's work experience as well as an inclusive culture within the district. Next slide, please. So going back to that slide, please, I'm sorry about that. The mission and vision are aligned with SSD, so it's not a totally different mission. It still encompasses what we have in the district. We just wanted to have an overall mission that really identifies and captures what the HR department really truly represents. We would like for our current employees, our future employees, the stakeholders, and just our overall community to be really aware and transparent about what we do. And so, next slide, please. And so we utilize the information from our guided principles. This is truly just a draft of that. And our key focuses are the area of customer service, the change of innovation, collaboration, transparency, recognition, of course, equity, and just the high ethical standards that we hold for ourselves as employees and what we would like for our students. And next I'll introduce Mrs. Wendy Oates.
Next slide. So as previously shared, according to the St. Louis Business Journal, SSD is listed as the 10th largest employer in the St. Louis region with 6,151 employees. Currently, we have about 24 HR staff with our current structure. So looking at this a bit more quantitatively, the data and the information published with this research, you can see there the top 5 employers, BJC being the largest employer with over 29,000 employees and about 108 HR staff. So with that current structure, their staff to HR professional ratio is about 274 to 1. The second largest employer being Washington University, they have about 18,000 employees with 85 HR staff. Their staff to HR professional ratio is 217 to 1. And then Mercy is the third largest employer in the region with 15,587 employees and 158 HR staff. So their staff to HR professional ratio is about 98 to 1. As we previously shared, A typical HR department calls for about one HR professional per 150 to 250 employees. Now, of course, there's some consideration for the industry, the location, and other relevant factors, but that's just based on current research. So currently, our SSD department calls for about 24 to 41 HR professionals. Holding on to those numbers, as it stands, we have 21 positions in the HR department, with 4 of those being in the benefits department, for a total of about 25 HR staff. If we were to look at that further and consider recruitment and retention efforts, recruitment typically calls for 1 recruiter per every 15 to 50 open positions. Again, this is contingent upon the industry, the location, and other related factors. So this proposed model will add 3 recruitment and retention specialists, but also relies heavily on the success manager position, as Kevin Ender will talk about in a second. I'm sorry, Kevin, I called your name.
Can I point out one thing? So when, in that last slide, it said 24 staff, and then there's 25 positions, but we talked, there's 24 staff members that we have currently in there. There's 1 vacant position that is nobody.
So, the next slide. So again, considering our current state versus our desired state and the way in which we support staff with those numbers, our current department, our staff to HR professional ratio is 256 to 1.
It's 246 if you go to 25.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. And then with the proposed structure, that would be 192 to 1. And then ideally, going back to that research, it tells us about 150 to 250 per HR staff. Now, Kevin Ender will talk a little bit more about the organizational chart as well as the proposed structure.
All right, so you may remember this first one from last meeting where Dr. Macklin gave you kind of an in-depth breakdown on this is the existing organizational chart for the SSD Human Resources Department. A couple big takeaways from this chart. One, you're going to see that work is pretty siloed in structure, so there are a lot of people that handle individual tasks, especially at that clerk level, but there's not a lot of cross-training within that model. Also within this existing model, there is no staff currently dedicated to the recruitment of new employees. You want to go to the next slide? So in the process of developing the new proposed human resources structure, we met with McMahon-Berger, so attorneys who specialize in employment law, and they really compiled a lot of the research both at the local level as well as the national level. They talked to a lot of other similar-sized organizations, and within their expertise, this is the model they brought to us that they were recommending of an approach similar to what you see on the screen. So what you see at the top is that Chief Human Resources Officer, and then underneath that, you have a Human Resources Director on the far left. Underneath that, it says 4 to 5 HR VPs, which is Human Resources Business Professionals. In the model that we're going to present you, those people are your success managers. So they call them HR business professionals. For us, those are your success managers. Then they also have in the model 1 to 2 staff for onboarding and recruiting, and then another HR director with 4 to 5 HR business professionals with 1 to 2 staff for recruiting and onboarding. Underneath that, they've got clerks. Then they have an internal communications and diversity position. When we looked at that, we thought about our current structure at SSD, and in our communications department, a lot of the function that they would have had for internal communications is already currently handled in our communications department. So instead, we centered on that word diversity, and when we think about our model, we're really more centered not just on diversity, but equity across the board. So you'll see in our model, we moved from a diversity position to an assistant director of equity position. And then you have there on the right, they've got the director, manager of benefits with 2 clerks underneath that, and then a chief human resources officer administrator, just their administrative assistant, who that individual would be. So that was the recommendation we got from McMahon-Berger. It came with a number of caveats, because one, they don't know our organization to the same level that we do. They're an external group giving a recommendation to us, and it would take this and make it work for you. The other caveat that we got with McMahon-Berger was especially they talked about those success managers, the number of recruiters that you're going to need, it really depends on the type of work you're doing and what your need is. And so recognizing the size and scope of our district and the fact that, yes, the number of different types of positions we have isn't that high, but the number of positions that we have is, you might need more staff dedicated to some of those processes, and we'll talk about that here on the next slide. So this is the proposed organizational chart. There's been a couple changes since we met last time. So the first one I'm going to call out in the lower left-hand corner of the picture, you'll see the 3 recruitment and retention specialists are reporting up to that director of talent acquisition and development. So before they were reporting to success managers, but really when we talk about those recruitment and retention specialists, that work should be focused on specific target audiences. So you'll have a recruitment and retention specialist who's just focused on recruiting teachers. And where you go to recruit teachers is different than where you're going to go to recruit paraprofessionals. So then you can have someone dedicated specifically to the recruitment of paraprofessionals, where you're looking for someone with at least 60 hours of college credit or willing to obtain that substitute certification. But then you also have another recruitment and retention specialist who can be dedicated to all of the operational positions that exist within the district. Because where you go to find bus drivers is very different than where you go to find teachers. But again, bus drivers are one of those positions too that we struggle to fill. There's more competition for it, and so we need to have dedicated individuals focused to that type of recruitment work. So within this model, it allows us to have people building connections and pipelines in really the 3 different veins that we're trying to attract talent to special school districts. Also within that model, you still have those 3 HR success managers, and we have them broken up into zones, very similar to what you would see with the HR business professionals. The only difference was instead of having more of those managers, we had additional clerks underneath them to help support that work as opposed to putting more at that management level. The positions that are on the screen in green, those are new positions that don't exist currently. So you have the new Assistant Director of Equity position that didn't exist currently. You have the Success Manager position for SSD schools and programs, which would be a new one, an HR Success Manager for operations. So you'll have 5 Success Managers across the board serving those different populations. 3 working with staff that are housed in partner districts, 1 for operations, and 1 for SSD schools and programs. And those people are really going to serve as that main concierge for staff once they're onboarded, where that success manager is going to be their main point of contact. And so really trying to streamline that communication process. You also have benefits as grouped under human resources. As we talked about last time, human resources has gone back and forth with whether or not benefits is a part of it. For most of our history, benefits has been separate and really been grouped more with finance than it has with human resources. But when people talk about why is it they're contacting human resources, it's benefits, benefits, benefits. And so grouping them under human resources makes a logical sense. It does make the department bigger, but the department that really should have been under the human resources umbrella to begin with. And they're adding some additional specialists within the benefits group. And then also employee labor relations is there as well. So that is the proposed model. The big changes since last time you'll see are just the recruitment and retention specialists kind of moved over there off to the side and just a little bit more clarification of who reports where. Next slide. So we also talked about the proposed title and department title changes based off your feedback. And we did especially taking that dive into what are the top 10 employers doing as well, where do we fit in. And so for the new title for the department, we kind of came up with a compromise that we would call ourselves Human Resources, but put a nice colon there, Office of Employee Success and Engagement, so that we are still driving home that the focus of the department is employee success and engagement, but still identifying the department with what people are most likely going to think of when they think of the human resource function. The potential title for the new chief still is that Chief People and Culture Officer. As you saw in the comparison to other organizations, that Chief People Officer is a term that's definitely out there within industry, and it helps us kind of rebrand the department that we are looking to move into a new direction. So Jennifer Henry's going to talk a little bit more about a couple more pieces.
Lord, I wanted to talk with you tonight a little bit about the positions that we're adding to the department. Please. As we shared last time, we shared a job description which you approved for our Chief People and Culture Officer, and this is an overview of the position. I just did want to remind everyone that this is the existing Chief Human Resources Officer position that we are retitling as the Chief People and Culture Officer. This leader will oversee the entire department and all of the individuals. Since posting the job after the last board meeting, we've had over 100 applications, and they'll have time for people to submit applications because they close on February 14th. Slide. For Assistant Director of Equity, this position is going to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in recruiting, hiring, and retention, and focus on that potential systemic inequity. It will report directly to Dr. Macklin, our Director of Equity, but we'll work in collaboration with our chief to ensure that we're meeting our equity goals as well as our human resources goals. Next slide. For the Recruitment and Retention Specialist, this position is going to have an emphasis on seeking diverse applicants and applicants who have licensure for current and global positions. They will work with managers, our success managers, on the onboarding process, develop new pathways for teaching, as well as promote SSD as an employer of choice in the community. Really help with that part of the district brand in our community. And they'll collaborate with the marketing administrator and the assistant director of equity in our company. One thing I did want to share about this position, last time when we presented, we had the position titled as Success Manager, and we heard your feedback about will people understand what that is, so we retitled it to Human Resources Success Manager. And this position will focus on that full employee experience. We want to make sure that we're fostering positive employee experience for everyone from hiring to retirement. So as you saw in the org chart, there'll be zones to provide that include more comprehensive support to employees during their entire journey with SSD. Our current structure is a little siloed, so that people go to a bunch of different people, including our managers for various things, and in our new structure, they'll have one success manager over the course of their career that they'll work with. Next slide. Again, we heard your feedback, and we can change this to the Human Resources Clerk. This position will provide with some clerical support and customer service to that success manager position. Slide. Human Resources Data Analyst is going to be integral into this department because they'll focus on the data, metrics, and statistics that will help with the recruitment, retention, and legal compliance. He'll work with the recruitment and retention specialist as well as the assistant director of equity to analyze data and trends for the recruitment and retention. Right? As we shared, there will be a net of 7 new positions. And so you had asked for more information about the financial impact on the budget. So phase 1, which would be for 22-23, there's a cost of $700,000. However, 4 of the positions we shared are going to be reduced as people transition out of there. And so the total cost is really $500,000. And then phase 2, which would be 23-24, we will add in those 3 recruitment and retention specialists for a $400,000 addition. So tonight we're going through our work session and addressing any additional questions you might have. As I mentioned, February 14th, that posting will close for the chief position. Bring back the information for approval at the February 22nd meeting, and then the chief interviews will be scheduled for the end of February and early March. Any questions?
Okay, I have a question. It's for Dr. Macklin. And so I'll put you on the spot here. You know, we're proposing to add, yeah, thank you. So we're proposing, you know, to add somebody to help you out with your work, an assistant director. And I realize I'm putting you on the spot here, because this is not a, I didn't give you time to think about the answer, so please feel free to say you need to think about it. My question is, and this is not an original thought, this is something the whole board has discussed. I want to be very clear. Is this enough support for you? Do you need more support? And then my own question is, would you at some opportunity, if the question were posed, if we were to offer more people in a department for you, what would that look like?
So is this a wish list?
Yeah, I'm basically saying, I mean,
Right.
this is our priority, right? I mean, this is something we talk about, you know, it comes up over and over again. I'm just kind of curious what it would look like, if we could do more, should we do more? Should we in the future be able to do more? What it would look like?
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Asner. Well, I truly understand that equity is the number one goal of the district of SSD, which it should be, to have those outcomes. And so I would say that this is a great start, right? Truly ensuring that equity permeates the organization is key. And so understanding that human resources is a key role and a key piece in being able to ensure talent management, acquisition, equal pay rates, all those key pieces. And so I think this is a great start. To answer your question.
I have a follow-up on that, because that is very similar thought on that. Why are we putting this under HR? I would vote, or I would move that regardless of what we do with HR, that you need some more individuals there. And the way I see that assistant director of equity, I could see that individual doing much more than working with HR. Because you, no offense, Dr. Macklin, I think you do a wonderful job. This is spread pretty thin. If we're going to have a separate equity area, why would that not be under that and not under HR?
Great. So to answer your question, when you look at the impact that equity has as it relates to HR, it is tremendous on the entire organization, right? And so when you talk about true recruitment from retirement, when you talk about talent management, when you talk about equal pay for employees, that is a number one place where you want to start. And actually, really, the director of equity, which is my role, was the initial start. But as we permeate and continue to build forward, you look at the impact that it has on HR and it has on the organization, it's really your next step as you talk about building out a division of equity.
So would you see that same type of thing where, let's talk about finances and contracts, that it would be there too?
It would be great to have that same kind of relationship, the same kind of commitment in each department with a overseer of those pieces. But to answer your question about where to start, this is a great place to start.
I've been in organizations before where I reported to two people. It was a very awkward situation. Will this individual report directly to you and then not to HR?
This person will report to myself and also the chief people and culture officer. The reason for that is because there's work that takes place strictly from an equity lens, right, which is what the lens that I bring, and then there's also work that takes place strictly through an HR lens. And so being able to do those key pieces are key. So it will be a dual report.
No, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Feel free to say, I want to think about it and get back to you. I mean that, like, I'm not justifying. Would it be helpful to have somebody, obviously focusing on equity within the organization for our employees and coworkers, as well as folks to help you with the task of focusing on equity for students and families?
I firmly believe that any time that you're focusing on equity, you can never add enough resources.
Okay.
You can never put enough resources as it relates to equity, right? But again, if you're starting somewhere, this is a great place to start. Because the work that goes on daily that I entail, or from my position, still will continue to work with the schools, to work with individuals, to work with different divisions in the organization. But if you're starting somewhere, this is a great place to start.
Faster. Question, pedal to the metal, you know, anyway.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, and the first one is more broad. I think I know the answer to it, but I'd really like it stated during our board meeting. That is that one of the pieces of feedback I've heard from our community is, why are we revamping HR? Why are we allocating resources to it? Why are we spending what are significant numbers to make this happen? When we're in a staffing shortage, when we're missing paras, when we don't have enough people to fill the spaces that need filled, why are we allocating resources to this? And so I just think, like I said, I think I know the answer, but I think it'd be very helpful to have that very clearly stated as to why this gets to that problem.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So, as we shared in that earlier part of the presentation, there's a lot of factors into why we need to work with our HR department. There are a lot of processes and procedures that are outdated that need support. The staff in that department are very siloed, and we need to make sure that we have a better working relationship with the department so that we can better support our employees here. As you mentioned, hiring processes, disorders, territories, we need more support in those areas to make sure that we can get highly qualified staff in our schools to support our kids. So the better our HR department can be, the more productive they are, the better the staff we have in front of our kids.
I think one more piece of this too is the retention. To really keep people here, it's not just about getting them in the door and, making sure that they feel welcome and we support them in going into the classroom or into, to the warehouse, but it's really about making sure that we keep people and that they, know who to go to and they have, and there's that support. Right now, the structure is, not necessarily set up that way for our staff to be able to reach out and to really have that point person to help them walk through situations. And I think the thing around the advisory committee, what we really dove into was not only, we started at the place with, let's hear from our staff first, and the HR staff too. So our employees and our HR employees, and really saying, how do we really, both sides want the same thing. They want to stay here, they want to feel like they're welcome, and they want to be able to do a good job. HR wants the same thing too. And we felt like when we really analyzed it, in order to be successful long-term, we've got to better understand what our structure looks like to better support and to have key positions for people to be able to support coming into the district, but keeping them here too.
I can add, our current HR department focuses very strongly on hiring processes that doesn't encompass the engagement piece, doesn't include the equity piece. It's not the entire life cycle of the employee. We're really talking about having an HR department that supports the entire journey of an employee while they're serving. That's how it is.
I have some questions based on the slides that I saw. One of which is, one of the issues or one of the problems that we were trying to take care of was the silos and cliques. How will this take care of that?
The way the current structure is set up, take for example, each HR clerk focuses on...
No, pardon me, cliques.
I know. I'm referencing the clerks just as an example. So the clerks currently focus on a single aspect of the hiring process. And then that file gets passed on to each individual person. So it's very fast. If somebody is out, the job doesn't get done. So there are, as far as cliques, my understanding of that is there are certain people who have like tasks that are grouped together for certain parts of the work. But they're still silent. Only one person does this task, another person does task. So the new model will focus on the HR manager with supporting clerk in that process. That HR clerk and manager will be responsible for that entire process and not just a piece of it. So they'll go through the entire recruitment process with that candidate through hiring and onboarding.
Do we have enough people that could be generalists enough to be a success manager?
Do we have enough people?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a great idea. I just want to make sure that we're putting people in there that are qualified for that type of position.
We know that there'll be some movement in the current department based on the opening, but we will have, in the green positions that we'll be recruiting outside the organization for, that will look for that specialty expertise.
So we'll have internal expertise, which will be key in the process mapping out. Because right now, what we've been working with the managers, we've mapped out from what everybody is doing in their tasks, and we're saying, how do we make sure we build out a manual for anybody coming in new into the organization as an HR employee, and what do we all have to make sure that we all have knowledge base on. And so that's really mapping those pieces out. if you have 2 new positions or you have 3 new positions because of the movement within the HR department, you have still the expertise internally because there's that, you need that knowledge base, but also you have some opportunity for people from outside the organization who are really, they're experts in this and they've been trained and they have 4-year degrees or they have their master's degrees in working with HR. And so that's going to be really beneficial for us too, to be able to match that. I would say the staff that we have in our HR department are extremely hardworking. They're very knowledgeable, and they're absolutely able to work through this model and to be able to support the changes within it, because they do have that strong knowledge base.
They've been included in the process as we work with advisory committee to develop this model.
I'm sorry, a quick follow-up question. So were you referring to the slide number 7, Dr. Cuneo, when you were making?
Well, let's see. My own way.
That was slide number 7.
Feedback from the HR employees?
Yeah, HR employee feedback. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Because those, at least to me, I want to make sure, please, stop me and tell me if I got it wrong. There was, the last comment on the left side that is breakdown silos. But there was another comment, clicks within the HR department, / everyone gets along. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that's that was in terms of the interview process where the HR department wants to break down those pieces to be able, if you have more of a team approach and you're working as a team versus everybody has a silo, the clicks won't be established. So, what the HR department was referencing there is there's certain people that do certain functions of it, but it seems like sometimes there's a hierarchy in terms of who's able to do it and who's not. So we experienced that just in the interviews with the clerks, and we experienced that interview process with the managers, and it really is they're wanting to make sure that if we can build this team approach, that will break that down so we don't have this established or long established, like who gets to do what.
One of the things that I do think that would be important here is we have the data from last year for retention. We have that data that's broken down by bus drivers, by paras, by teachers.
Yes, we do.
We use that then as a benchmark, because if we put this into play, I'd like to be able to say that this has been effective. The way we can do that is by counting.
I think with the addition of the HR data analyst, we'll have a much better grasp on that because we'll look at all the trends across time. But like as you said, this will be the best year, or last year will be, and then we'll see the growth over time.
And I think that's a necessary piece to establish as we look at this. The key thing will be, we've looked at trends for the last 3 years where our resignations or retirements. Right now, as I said, expressed to the board last week was that we haven't seen a strong fluctuation over the last 3 years in terms of our resignations and retirements. They're staying fairly consistent, and to be able to say, how do we do better with that? Adding in these positions will be really critical in terms of that retention. So people will retire because they want to retire because they've earned that, and to be able to offer that and support that. But the other thing is the retention and how do we make sure we bring people in and that they will stay long term. And so we've been very thoughtful in terms, I think as the board, but the board has been very thoughtful in terms of how do we look at positions, how do we look at pay, how do we make sure that we support all of our different positions that are key to supporting our students. And I think in terms of what the long-term effect is really that retention to keep, because the knowledge base and the training that goes into a new, onboarding somebody new does cost resources and money. So, and also it does interrupt and disrupt student learning if you have too much fluctuation. So we want to make sure we have that consistency. So I think that to us is, it's the recruitment, but it's that retention piece to bring in from the employee experience.
Any other questions?
Yes, one that I have now is talk about retention, and we're talking about long term. Given some of the information that we're getting through various sources, just like the St. Louis Business Journal, the stories that are being written regarding future operations, and people going through a period where folks now are less inclined to come to the office. I'm hoping that what we're talking about here is creating an environment that counters those kinds of desires, because you need people, teams, working together in a more interactive manner. Do we see that long-term these efforts will not be effective, or we will be successful being able to create that environment to counteract that particular nuance of people's thoughts about jobs now in these capacities?
Yes, I think that this model will help with that efficiency. One of the things that we were very critical of in the committee was making sure that we were looking at the culture and engagement of our employees. And the HR currently doesn't focus on these efforts. So part of the work going forward will be looking at the different generations in the workforce that we talked about last time, because our baby boomers are looking at something different than our Gen Zs or our millennials. What does that look like for those people? So one of the things that we did this year as a district is we offered a different health option for medical plans than what we had in the past, and that was something that was attractive to our younger employees because they had a limited out-of-pocket cost. So looking at ways that we can support our employees like that, being flexible and those kinds of benefits, those are going to help in the long term. So we still have strategies that we'll need to implement over time, but this is the start of that work.
And I would also say that, true equity work is about truly understanding the individual and not being additional, but intentional. And so when you look at what the individuals who are seeking jobs now most look at, especially look at the Man and Berger report, that one of the number one pieces that they want to know is, what is your company's or organization's or school district stand on social justice? All right? And so being able to clearly articulate those key pieces, that's key as you start to hire.
Yeah, and I believe that that's important, because moving forward as a country and some of the places that we find ourselves in separation, that's going to require an influx of information that we call education. And therefore, as an entity, not only as an educational entity, but a public service entity, because we're often a specialized service to the public. I think it's very important that we not lose sight of a few of those particular things that we're faced with as a society here now in this country. And so this work is going to have an opportunity to be groundbreaking. And I've often said, we have the term special in our name. How special do we want to be? And so I'm just making these particular observations and statements so that we maintain being focused, that we are groundbreaking, have that ability. I want us to make sure that collectively we become the difference makers.
Dr. Macklin, you will have a role then, I'm guessing you will have a major role in looking at who you want for Assistant Director of Equity.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I've worked with Dr. Bolton here to write the job description to ensure that those pieces are there.
I just wanted to make sure that everything was in sync on that.
Appreciate it. Yes, yes. Any other questions?
I do have a question. The conversation got me thinking about, benefits are clear of this revised structure. Focus on equity is primary, of course. I think a lot about norms If we're talking about revising and creating a new culture in our HR department, this is like for Dr. Keenan or for you or for whoever, what are some norms, if we're resetting norms, bring about a different dynamic in our HR department, what are some things you have in mind that will make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that, we actually, when we met with the HR, leadership team, just this week, that was really kind of like, what is this gonna look like in terms of that? And it really kind of came to, when we're mapping this out, it's going to change the norms because everybody's going to be working as a team, as opposed to I have to focus in on this part of it, and then Dr. Cuneo focuses on his part of it. It's really going to establish that culture of we are working together, and that we're also going to infuse other supports for them, because they've had to manage a lot of this individually on their own. So I think that that's really going to be the big pieces around it, is building that team effect, changing the culture in terms of how to support one another. There's an absolute want with that early on with the discussions that we had with the HR group, the staff in HR. There is that want and need for that, and that they all show up each and every day to make sure that they're supporting and they know each individual pieces of their job, but they're saying collectively this will change how we interact with one another. So that's going to be that energy, that how do we look at things differently. And I think the biggest component that's going to change is how are we supporting the employee experience instead of this is the data source, or this is the information we have to take care of. That's a change in thinking in terms of an HR department that functions in terms of making sure that the paper or more of a compliancy. This is more of the change of the culture change is going to be how do we make sure that we're here for the people and for the employees of special school districts. So those norms establishing that are going to be key with them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's yet to be established and
Yeah.
written up, and
Yeah.
the ideas of team building are we talking about, or what kind of regular meetings are we
Yeah.
having to?
Started to have those conversations where, they're like, we have to meet every week and we're going to figure these pieces out. So that's the established pieces that, they haven't experienced much. So I think this is going to really allow for the flourishing of leaders within our HR department, and also the experts, and allow for their voices to come up. And like we do with our district leadership team, just like we do with the board, we have our norms, and I think that's established on how we all work together.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Good. Next, we have our budget update for 2023.
President Cuneo, Vice President Potroff, Board of Education, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I'll talk this evening about the budget presentation, give you an update on revenues, projected expenditures, and current request for additional staffing. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you'll see, and as it's been mentioned by Ms. Lee, by Dr. Macklin, by the HR group, equity and diversity is by far our number one goal, and our budget committee made it that as well. So we'll have to remind Dr. Macklin that it's support, not a blank check or a wish list, but that is something that we truly do believe in, and that's why we put it first. So you can see our other goals: staffing, curricular support facilities as well. Slide, please. So some major revenue budget assumptions, and we talked about this with our budget committee already, and our teams. So 2022 is a non-reassessment year, and a non-reassessment year historically we see between a $2 and $3 million increase, and that's an increase in personal property and other, not your real estate or your there. So DESE has indicated through channels, the governor's speech, that they are pushing for a foundation formula that will be fully funded. They're not going to increase it, but we won't see a decrease increase there. Sales tax, which is your Prop C, is strong, so we're projecting an increase in sales tax. However, transportation, at this point, the guidance is that it won't be increased. It will continue to be local. Great question during the budget committee meeting was, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we have budgeted X amount and we're only going to receive a little bit of that. It means that from the state level, they're not funding it at the level they should. It's underfunded by about 175 to 200 million. So our projections are fine, but they still are woefully underfunded. And then investment earnings are increasing, so we're starting to see some basis points, we're starting to see some interest rates, but nothing like they were prior to the pandemic. So we'll see a slight increase in investment money, and then Medicaid revenues through cost settlement and some other increases in identifying employees for reimbursement will increase to approximately $4 to $5 million. And as we've talked about, that might be a little bit on the conservative side. Next slide, please. So as we're looking at revenue by source for next year, local funding, which is the taxes, you'll see that there's $322 million projected for FY22. As we talked about this summer, Blankenship, we had to roll back the tax rate because of Blankenship. And so we're projecting a $14 million decrease to that $322 million right now. So we'll see that bottom line, that total revenue. We're still waiting for final taxes to come in, final current taxes coming in from December and January before we really know what that looks like and see what it continues throughout the year. To give you some idea, the county tells us what an original charge is, which is basically the amount of money they send out on real estate taxes and personal property taxes. And so our original charge last year was $312 million. Our original charge this year was $302. So we've seen a decrease of about $10 million there. But then you put in reassessment, you put in the new values, and we're looking at about $14 million. That's as solidified as the number we have at this point. Again, as I said all year, we'll continue to bring you an updated number so that you know where that's falling. And then, so we'll see an increase of about, like I said, $1 million from interest rates and Prop C for next year. $2 to $3 million in the tax rate, and then 4 to 5 in Medicaid. So you'll see that while we are projecting for FY23 lower than this current year, it will be higher than where we ended up because we have not rolled back that budget number with Blankenship yet. We wanted to have an accurate number before we did that. Next slide, please. And so as we look at the major expenditures, the budget assumption, we've negotiated 2 years, and we're going to go into that second year of salaries with our group. We know that we've negotiated 3.5% to 4% increase for year 2 as well, and so we'll see that reflected in the expenditures. We have a current estimate of 3 to 5% of the increase in benefits. We'll monitor purchase services and supplies, and then we know that disproportionality will be required to spend $5 million, approximately 5. It's closer to 5.5 to 5.8 for next year. Next slide. So you'll see here, these are the projected expenditures, and please keep in mind, these are, they're on the high side. We know that. They're on the high side right now. We'll continue to bring them into that more accurate range as we get into budget presentation on February 22nd, and then for sure when we bring the final budget. But as you can see, certified and non-certified salaries, we're showing an increase of about 3.5% there. Fringe benefits, that's an increase of 3%. And then purchase services and supplies, we kept relatively flat at this point. And then you'll see capital outlay. We know the capital outlay is going to come down, and here's why. As we talked a month or so ago, when we did the 5-year facility plan, one of the questions that was brought up was, have we done everything for our buildings before we would move into renovating central office? And as we started looking at it, we found some more things that we could do before we did that renovation. And so what we've done is we've flip-flopped the next couple of years in year 5. So we've pushed back the renovation of central office so that we can do some more things in our buildings and for our students, such as redoing playgrounds at all our buildings, and that's not cheap. When you look at the students we serve, we're looking at $750,000, if not $1 million per playground. We can do hallways, we can refinish some rooms, we can upgrade some of the little things in the schools that they need to. We can put in a dental lab, at the tech school. We can just do a bunch of smaller projects and really make sure that we've done everything for our students before we renovate central office. And so there were gonna be some extra costs with renovating central office, as far as the technology, with moving, rent, different things like that. So that's gonna be pushed up. So you'll see that capital project, or that capital outlay drop. We know that we'll also see a decrease in that budget, for non-certified salaries. As it's been brought up, there are vacancies, with our paraprofessionals. So we know that that number is high for right now. We're looking at benefits. We don't have good guidance on that yet, but we can see where that could possibly drop. As you can see, purchase services, supplies, over the last couple of years with the pandemic and closures, haven't been expended to the amount that was budgeted. So we'll monitor that as we go, and we'll have a pretty good number of what that looks like when we bring it back to you. Now that we've been open for a year, we'll have a full year under our belt. And so you'll see that it says $516 million. We know that's high. That will be brought back down for the next meeting, and then after that in May. Next slide, please. So again, as we have talked about several times, we will always focus on all of our schools, each of the 22 partner districts. We'll focus on some which are disproportionate schools, which are 11 school districts, and then our 8 districts with higher distress community index. And so, again, we approach this zero-based budget, which really allows us to do some good things. We can really take the budget and impact schools, impact students, as opposed to making them live within that budget. They identify things they need, they want, and things that could really enhance their programs, and they ask for that, whereas other places would say you have X amount of dollars. So we really take a look at it that way. Next slide, please. This is the disproportionality. There's a question of how this looks. We do this on a per student basis, a per pupil basis. And so you'll see up at the top, we're looking at $5.8 billion for next year. That does not include carryover, which isn't spent this year. So we'll have an idea of what that looks like later. But that 5.8 gets broken out into the 11 schools, and that's divided on a per student basis. You can see over to the right on that sheet that some school districts have hired individuals. So, for example, if you look at Parkway, they have one teacher who's being paid with disproportionality funding. They have 2 SLPs, they have a school psych, they have 2 and a social worker as well. You take those salaries, you subtract that from that $916,000, and then they have $376,000 left to spend on programs, training, and supplies for disproportionality. And so that's how we kind of receive those or get to those funds. You'll see a couple asterisks over to the right. If you look at Jennings, what we're going to do, and we talk about this with Tier 3, this is just an example of this year. They've requested a couple people, a couple teachers, a couple instructional coaches, and it would be more than their allotment of $100,000. So what we're looking at is that we know that one, they're Tier 3, and that there will be some carryover. So what we're going to look at is providing an instructional coach, social worker, or 2 instructional coaches. Now, we know that will be over their allotment, but we understand that as a Tier 3 school, we're going to support them with that. So that's something when you get into what does Tier 3 look like, that is a way we support a Tier 3 school. Next slide, please.
Go back to that. Rockwood, we're paying over $1 million and we're not paying, they're not using any of that?
That only reflects staffing. So that just shows on the right what that would be. So if you take the staffing and you back it out of their original budget, so they're heavy into professional development, trainings, and supplies.
Do we monitor to see if this is effective?
Yes, I know Ms. McRiddle talks to her directors all the time. We talk to them, and then
She meets with the liaison. This is really about Gen Ed initiatives, so this is not our special education directors directing this. But Ms. McRiddle meets with the liaisons to make sure that they're talking about on a monthly basis, like how are they progressing with things. And I think that truly is, this partnership around proportionality really planned, so that it's managed within their own system.
So just very tentatively here are some of the requests. As we move through, we continue to have budget meetings with our schools, with our departments, and our partner districts. And so you'll see on the screen there that our partner districts have requested 12 teachers, 21 paraprofessionals, 2 coordinators, and 2 SLPs. And then through disproportionality, we're looking at hiring a behavior specialist, social worker, 2 instructional coaches, and a teacher. Next slide, please. And then our special school district request, 2 social workers, an instructional coach, 1 OT, 2 EPSs, or 1 EPS, and then the 4 for human resources there. And so all of those will go to support our students, and many of those will go to supporting our partner districts as well. Next slide. So you'll see there on the screen, and this number changes. There's 53 current requests that we have tentatively approved that we're still working through, 5 reduction in staff, and those are at the tech school as we transition from that full day to half-day program. So we'll continue to monitor this. We'll continue to work. I expect that number will be a little bit lower when we bring it again, but we'll continue to take a look and see what our partner districts and our schools need.
Just to kind of reference to, we've met with every one of the partner districts. We're finalizing those. We met with the superintendent, their cabinet, and have reviewed a structured process of reviewing what the highlights of the districts, each one of the partner districts. We've talked about where their zero-based budgeting needs are at, how do we match and support their tier supports, and then we also look at that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, if they fit in that. So, we started that. One of the biggest criticisms I heard when I first came here was the superintendent's like, we didn't see the budget. We didn't even know what the budget looked like. So we were making sure that we had a comprehensive review. This not only allows for us to, with our cabinet, to be able to meet with each one of the partner districts as the directors lead these conversations, it really does connect us and make sure that we are applying continuous equity in terms of how do we support our students in our district, and at the same time understanding what each district is needing in their unique needs, and that we can better support them on an ongoing basis. So these discussions are really about how, it's not about how do we agree to disagree. It's about how do we really look at some of the data and really kind of say what's needed to support the students in your district.
Next slide, please. So, question came up about fund balance. We finished FY '21 at 74.52, or $330 million. So, based on current approved budget, with deficit spending, we project it will close at 66%, and then we're projecting, like I said, without hard numbers tonight, we're projecting another deficit spend for next year, but we'll have a much better understanding of where we're looking. We'll probably fall in that 66 to 70% range at the end of the year. Board of Education has indicated a desire to maintain 6 months of operating expenditures as a fund balance. And so kind of what that looks like is every month we're open during the school year, we spend approximately $45 million. And so if you multiply that by 6 months, we'd be looking at $270 million range to keep it at that 6 month of expenditures. So we'll continue to monitor that as we go along and let you know where spending will finish the year as we get closer. Next slide. Happy board, more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next up is 2.04, the comprehensive school improvement plan.
Being Vice President Pascal, President Cuneo, and Dr. Keenan. I'm Molly Bolton, and I am the Executive Director of two presentations for tonight. The first is on the second quarter update on the comprehensive school improvement plan. Slide, please. So this is just a reminder of Goal 1 and the 4 strategies that fall under. And this is kind of where we are. I formatted this a little bit differently this time, so I'm hoping this format works for you guys. So what you'll see here is you'll see the strategies listed as well as the accomplishments in the past quarter for each of those strategies. Then I give you a report on where we are with our milestones, and then the next steps that the strategy teams will be looking at. So as you can see, all of our strategies for Goal 1 are on target to be completed by the end of the year, or have already completed for this year, and we'll just be working on refining some of their processes. A couple things to highlight. Strategy 1.1, one of the big things we have been working on, and we are getting ready to pilot, is a revision of our universal checklist procedures, which used to just be a walkthrough, and we are now expanding that from a walkthrough as well as an observation and a conversation to really get a feel for how our teachers have implemented those universal strategies. This change was based on a lot of feedback we had from our administrators and our teachers, in that a walkthrough just did not give them enough information and enable them to give good feedback to our teachers to help improve the system. You can also see we've shared some data with our administrators and staff. And we did complete our instructional audit, which I will be bringing to you in the near future. 1.2, this is our secondary plan with self-determination, and that strategy actually has completed the work that they set out to do for this cycle, and they'll be working on refining some processes as we move forward. 1.3 is our safety and security. And you can see that one of the exciting things that they have that I'd like to highlight is MSBA, the Missouri School Board Association, has asked them to come and present our Incident Command Center structure that we have in place here at Special to be a model for all state districts. So I think that's really exciting and something for us to be very proud of. And they are all completed as well. And again, we'll be working on refining their processes for the rest of the cycle. Our last strategy for this one is our family engagement strategy, and you can see they are working on another exciting thing that I'd like to highlight here is they are doing a community mental health first aid offering, which is already full and has started a waiting list. So this is a nice thing that we can offer our community, our families and community members, to provide this training for mental health first aid. We also do that for our staff. And we do have some offerings coming up in March for our staff as well. All their milestones are on target, and they are going to be working on adding some family engagement on-demand training, as well as we have deployed our family engagement survey, and they will be looking at the survey results for our schools to develop action. Next slide, please. This is our workforce excellence goal. Just to remind you of the strategies there. Next slide. As you can see, they do have their milestones on target as well. A couple things to highlight for retention and recruitment this fall. We did have 4 to 6 at the time of this data gathering student teachers that were moving into full-time FTEs. And we were also working with them to do a process improvement cycle to see what things we can improve within their student teaching experience to get them ready to move into a full-time position with us upon graduation. You can also see the fill rate right there. We are at 98.6% with teachers, 100% for administrators, and 90.72% for our paraprofessionals. It is starting to be job fair season. So that is one of the things on their radar for this next quarter, as well as continuing to gather that life cycle data that we talked about, you heard a little bit about in the HR presentation, where we're really looking at the employee experiences and how to improve those. The second one is increasing the diversity. So, I think we reported this, recently, but we have increased our local advertising through, strategically placed billboards, throughout the county as well as Indeed. And we have this program where we are now, through DESE, able to hire aides and then support them in taking a 20-hour course, and then they can become paraprofessionals. And so we've had several going through that process right now, and we've had several complete the program very successfully. So we do feel like this will be a nice avenue. Actually, this evening, and Kenny's already left, but Kenny stopped me and he said, hey, I have a bus aide that's really interested in this program. Like, give me some information so I can share it with them. So I really think this will be a great avenue for helping us fill some of those para vacancies as kind of an alternative route for that. So we're excited about that as well. You can also see our data. We have October compared to December, so you can kind of see our figures there. Next slide, please. For goal 3, this is our engagement survey. And again, these are our strategies. A couple things to highlight here. Definitely identifying collaborative relationships that we are focused on for this year. We're really looking at those that we may not have a formal agreement with and trying to formalize those agreements. And also making sure the agreements that we have meet the criteria for a valid formal agreement. You can see all their milestones are also on target. And they're going to be working to revise some of those agreements and then increase some of those agreements with some of those collaborative partnerships that we don't currently have. And also devising a succession plan for this strategy. So once this CSIP cycle ends, where does this strategy live and who becomes the process owner for this strategy? So they are working on that. 3.2 is our voice of customers. We are looking at moving to a new survey tool next year with Panorama. So we're really excited about that. The nice thing about that tool is we can compare our responses to other districts around the nation. So they have a norm set. So we can kind of compare how our families feel, how our staff feel, compared to other districts around the nation. So that'll be a nice bonus for us. Also, they have completed all of their milestones and action steps for this year. And they are going to continue working on some climate survey pieces for partner district families. Currently, when we do our climate survey, it's with our SSD school families, but we're really looking at avenues of how we can tap in and make sure we're hearing the voice of our partner districts. Slide, please. And our last one is our equity goal. Slide. So we're continuing to work on our 5-year professional learning plan, of which we're going to be in year 3. We will be bringing that to you in April and do an in-depth look at that. We have been taking that plan to our stakeholder groups through our CSIP strategy to get feedback on that. Our equity stakeholder group has a meeting coming up very soon in which they're going to be looking at that, as well as our equity indicators that we are drafting. All of that will be brought to the board in April for review and feedback. And Dr. Macklin has been working tirelessly to present the framing the framework to the different work groups. We are down to right at 8 groups left, or 8 to 10, I would say, out of our 64-ish, I want to say. Don't have the exact number on that, sorry. But we will have that for you in the equity presentation in April. So all milestones are on target here. And like I said, we're continuing to gather that stakeholder feedback on those plans and indicators. And we're going to finish up those equity framework presentations. Any questions about the update on the CSIP?
Yeah, I did have that question for you know, about the slide 10.
Yeah.
Regards to achieving equity in the student outcome.
Absolutely. So when we look at our goals for our CSIP, they are always driven to improve student outcomes. However, to your point in your question that you asked about, would we also look at equity and resources and those sorts of things? Those would be objectives to get us to those positive student outcomes. But ultimately, our goal always in everything we do is to improve our student outcomes. So that's kind of the big goal, but we do have those smaller pieces in there, which would be looking at equity resources, making sure we have equity and resources and those sorts of things as well. One of the ways we do that is we look at our integrated tiered model, which you're going to hear a little bit more about in our next presentation. Where we're looking at what resources do our districts have, do our partner districts have, do we provide as special school districts, and making sure we see a good balance there, and one that meets the needs of the district. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm glad for the breakdown there as far as resources. Talk about outcomes, measurements.
For our student outcomes measurements.
Yeah.
So we look at things like positive post-secondary outcomes. So looking at where do they go after they leave us, and is that a positive placement for them? Desi has a very narrow view of what a positive secondary placement looks like. We like a little bit broader view, and our families like a little bit broader view. And so we do look at that. We look at their achievement rates. So how are they growing in achievement, which we can see through some of our progress monitoring results, as well as how are they doing on our state tests, and what do those rates look like. We also look at, for some of our high school kids, how are those credits, how are they obtaining credits, and are they on track to graduate? When you look at our CTE programs, we're looking at what are some of those stacking credentials that they can get, and then how does that open doors for them for those positive secondary. So there's a variety of factors that we do look at.
No, I didn't. I was giving a thumbs up.
Okay, thumbs up. Okay.
Thank you. Thumbs up.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Next, we are going to 2.05, the 5-year curriculum and instruction plan.
That's me again. All right, so, next slide. The purpose of this presentation tonight is really just to give you an update on where we are with the 5-year curriculum and instruction plan that was, brought to you last year. Next slide, please. Just want to remind you, a little bit about the difference between curriculum and instruction. So remember, curriculum is the what. It's what we want students to know and be able to do. It ensures that we're meeting those state standards that we have, and it provides that continuity across our schools. So no matter if you're at Ackerman, if you're at Litzinger, if you're at Southview, or if you move and get to another school, the curriculum is the same as far as what we want students to know and be able to do. The big piece that changes is the instruction. And that's where we look at how do you teach the curriculum. And in special education, this can be differentiated to meet the needs of the specific student. And so that might look different depending on the student's needs, as well as depending on the class needs at that moment in time. And it's really looking at the instructional pieces, looking at what are those resources and strategies we incorporate into our instruction in order to teach the curriculum. So both of those are super important to student learning. Next slide, please. This slide just talks about the combinations that we have to have. So we have to have the curriculum, we have to have the strong instructional pieces, and then we use assessment to ensure that we have that student learning. That's the heart of everything. Next slide. So I'm going to do a review of our goals. So these are the 4 goals that we had set out in our 5-year plan last year. And so as you can see on our progress there, this is just a quick summary, and then I'll go a little bit more in depth for each one. But our curriculum is reviewed and updated regularly for both the SSD special education schools and programs as well as the career technical schools. Right now, all of our programs that we had slated for review and revision are on track, and those will be brought to you in June for your approval. Instructional materials textbooks are refreshed on a regular schedule. That schedule, all of those have been completed for this year and have been budgeted for this upcoming budget cycle. Goal 3 is that instruction is supplemented and augmented in the partner districts to meet the needs by that tiered support. And so we have our integrated tiered model, and those are in the process right now of being updated with our partner in collaboration with our partner districts. And they are on track for those updates. And we're also working on the gap analysis between current state and desired state to ensure we have action plans in place and our professional learning in place to help get to our desired state. And then the last goal is really supporting our staff with those high quality, high leverage practices, high yield instructional strategies so that our students are getting the best instruction. And so if you remember, you approved a couple of positions for us last year for instructional coaches. We have 27 instructional coaches out in our partner districts that are housed in the partner district schools that are out there supporting our teachers, not only our new teachers, but our veteran teachers as well. They're supporting them through observations and feedback, as well as walkthroughs, and then supporting those high leverage practices and high yield instructional strategies. And we also completed the instructional audit, which again, I'll be bringing this result to you in the future. So going a little bit deeper, for our curriculum review process this year, our special education courses that are being reviewed and revised that will be brought to you again in June, are math, K-12, character development, personal finance for high school, as well as our social emotional curriculum. With our social emotional curriculum, we have a K-12 for our students who are assessed on the general education assessment, as well as those that are assessed on our alternative assessment. So we make sure we meet all the needs of all of our students. For our tech courses that are being reviewed, automotive technology, carpentry, design and entrepreneurship, electrical trades, HVAC, construction and outdoor maintenance. And then the one that I did not add that is one that we are writing is our multimedia curriculum that will be coming to you as well. As far as our materials, instructional materials and textbooks, we did do a review of our grade level assessment for English Language Arts K-5, and we are renewing the current materials that we have. They have been shown to be pretty effective with our students, and so we will be renewing those materials. And in career and technical schools, you can see that those courses that we did a review on, we also reviewed the textbooks and materials for that, and have budgeted for updated textbooks as needed in those courses. We also had centralized purchasing happen this year, and so that was where we were combining with some of our bigger vendors, our purchasing as a district. And what that did was that enabled us to access discounts and free materials. So we were able to do that this year. And our directors and coordinators were pleasantly surprised when some extra money was in their budget because they had gotten some free things. So we did evaluate that process and did a PDSA with it, Plan, Do, Study, Act, to see how we can improve that process. We do have some process improvements moving forward for this next year, but we will be continuing that process. Next slide, please. For goal 3, as I said, we're in the process of updating our integrated tiered models and gap analysis. We also did a training audit where we worked with every teacher to see the programs and strategies that they have been trained in. And we provided a master list, if you will, of all the different things our teachers have been trained in. And what we hope is that that will, A, help us identify gaps in programs or strategies that teachers may need to receive training in. But also, if we do have a teacher leave or move to a different school, we can see what other teachers maybe have been trained in those same things, so that we can provide that continuity of service and keep that high for our students. For our MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support facilitators, we did a program evaluation on that program last year, which we brought to you. And one of the recommendations was that we would target in for districts who were higher needs of this type of support. And so as of, right now, we are supporting Riverview, Ferguson, Florissant, Hazelwood, Jennings, as well as Rittner and Melville, in that area. And so they have an NTSS facilitator who goes in and works mostly on the gen ed side with the overall district systems, as well as sometimes they target a school or two for that person to go in and do some support. Next slide. Goal 4, this is those high quality instructional support. So again, universal walkthroughs, which I talked about, some improvements we're making to that process, but those were completed, and data provided and action plans created. We did complete the instructional audits, which we'll be sharing those results with you, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Just a little foreshadowing there. And then we're continuing those Tier 2, Tier 3 supports. If you remember, you did add a few positions for us as far as our numeracy coaches, our social emotional behavior effective practice specialists, and our autism effective practice specialists. And so we're able to provide more support to our staff in those areas. We also had our para induction plan, which you got to hear about that a few months ago, where we're supporting paras and doing some targeted training opportunities for them. And then we're doing some focused professional learning for our administrators this year, the second Wednesday of every month, that is targeted around our special education processes to ensure that our administrators are up to date and current and can support our staff in that area. And the last piece with this that I'd like to highlight is we are continuing our professional learning in foundational literacy and foundational numeracy. And so we do have a group of 40 teachers going through the letters, and I think we had 38 going through numbers this year. And we had about that same amount last year. Continuing that on to train and support more teachers. Those are multi-day training with letters. There are, it is 8 days of training, and with numbers it is 10 days of training. And so we're able to provide that support for them, and then to get that foundational support. So our future plans that we have coming up. We are in the process of updating our special education learning modules for our teachers, and that will roll out next year. The modules we had previously were not quite as engaging as we'd like for them to be, and our communications department has been invaluable in helping us make those trainings more engaging for our staff, so I'm excited for that rollout. We also have planned a summer academy for our partner district general education principals. And really looking at how they can be instrumental in understanding and supporting special education and special education processes in their building. And that will happen on June 21st. Thank you. And so we are working on presentations for that. We did survey the partner district general education principals to see topics that they might be interested in learning more about with special education. So we're in the process of developing those presentations. Excited for that opportunity as well. A couple of other things. We are creating common formative assessment in our SSD tools. And we have applied for a teacher retention grant through DESE. And so upon receiving that grant, it will be about $1 million over 3 years. And we have some great ideas of how to use that money. And so one of the things we are looking at is extending our new teacher mentoring program to be a 2-year program instead of a 1-year program. DESE requires us to do 1 year of mentoring, but we feel that there is value in having that mentor be over 2 years to ensure our new teachers have the supports that they need. And those supports are in-house. So they're in the school typically that teacher is in, so they're readily available. Also, another one that I'm really excited about is creating some model classrooms. So this would allow us to stipend some of our high-performing teachers to enable other teachers, these could be veteran teachers or they could be new teachers, to come in and do observations in our classrooms, as well as having those model classroom teachers provide resources to share with those teachers that come and support our classrooms. We feel like this is a great job embedded professional learning opportunity, and it's a peer-to-peer, which is very, very powerful and supported by research. And then the last one is, because we have this great induction program for our paraprofessionals, you know, we have a one-man show with that. So Kevin Haar is really supporting a lot of that work. And so something we would like to pilot is a professional learning coach. So similar to our instructional coaches, but this person would be dedicated to professional learning. If we do get the 3-year grant, we would be increasing, we would have 1 position the first year, and then increasing to 3 positions in the second and third year. We would really be looking at the impact on retention and job satisfaction that we have with our paras and job support, and to see if then we will continue that after the grant. So it would kind of be, this is a way for us to pilot it, and really see what kind of impact we can have, before we decide to add positions. Next slide. That is all I have for this. Questions tonight?
I got a couple.
Sure.
Second to last, you review the goals. You have 3 programs that you're applying for, you're getting for retention of teachers. All sound excellent to me. My question is, if we change HR, one of the big things is we're going for retention of staff and retention of personnel.
Absolutely.
How do I know if any, what works? Because it would seem that you would have to factor out some of these items to find out, HR change at work, or is it the fact that Kevin Hart and his work, which I'm, sure has an effect, or would it be some of the other things that we're talking about? Would it be the fact that we've expanded the mentoring program to 2 years?
So I think,
How can I tell
Yeah.
which is effective and which didn't really do anything?
and so what I would say is, we'll be looking at some, and I'll be working with evaluation and research to really look at some measures very targeted to, for example, the second-year mentors. So we would be looking at that group that received that mentoring, and to see what that impact would be.
So you'd have to cut those out of the HR study.
I don't think we would necessarily cut them out, but I think this would be information to support the second-year mentoring.
But no, I think you would. I think you'd have to cut out certain factors, because if you didn't, there could be an increase in that would cause, that would in fact, it may have caused the increase in retention. So it would seem that when you're doing your HR study, you would have to factor out some of these, or at least not compared to the groups that have this also. Because otherwise you could have a confounding variable.
Right. I'm wondering if we could look at it both ways, though. I'm wondering if we could look at it
Oh,
factored out and then
you
factored
could
out.
measure one against the other,
Sure. Yeah.
but
I think there's a lot of ways we can slice and dice.
I think but what I'm saying is, you need to have this figured out beforehand,
Sure.
not after it started.
I think too that we have to make sure that what they're talking with the mentoring, that's the day-to-day school work. HR is not going to be experts on that part of it. And so the HR part of it is really about what is it from the HR employee experience when we looked at the high needs of what they're asking for is, the benefits, when they talk about payroll, all those needs that they have on the HR side, that's going to be that component that HR is going to support. So I think we're going to gather supporting data in terms of, and I know you're a statistician, I know you analyze the pieces.
But what you're doing is, you can't, what I'm saying is that that's very important in HR. That could cause people to retain. But if I'm going to look at my endpoint in the data, I can't have confounding variables. So what I'm going to have to do is factor out part of this. And this needs to be done before we look, not afterwards. So you don't do the study and then decide what I'm going to do. That's cheating. Which people do all the time. But if you want it to be effective, which what you need to do
Really wanna
is,
know the answer.
this all needs to be done beforehand.
Yeah.
So we need to be doing, setting this up now for us. If we're going to say, if we change HR, if we change HR and we're going to use retention as one of our variables, we need to learn how to cut this out right now. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good variable.
I think that what Molly was saying too, is we're looking at establishing how we can take into consideration, like, how do we, with the smaller groups that they're gonna be having, she's not able to do all of them, but how do we expand that? How do we track where those people are at? How does that track with what we're getting information from the HR department in terms of how they're supporting, where the paraprofessionals, teachers, operations? So there's a broader concept there too. So trying to match up those pieces. And in our I will say, we have a very strong research department that really understands how to take into consideration these aspects to be able to kind of funnel it in so we have more information around that. So absolutely. And Molly works very closely with them, and so we were, make sure that we're, that those components of it, these pieces are, is like, who's it going to address, or who's this going to affect on this side, and looking at comparing that information versus the broader scope of bringing people into the district lands right in the middle there, so absolutely.
And I think if you looked at like interviews, surveys, focus groups, you could target questions, to say, what's caused you to stay here? What supports do you feel like you've received? I think you could look at some qualitative data, that aspect. It would get at some of the different initiatives, structure those questions in a way that would lend itself to gathering information. I think that'd be one thing.
Perhaps, as these outcomes are being presented to us as a board, especially when it comes to budgetary consideration, also acknowledge when they're,
Yeah.
I think that it, because in vivo, you can't, you have to acknowledge them.
Yeah.
Teacher retention rates went up. Here are all the different factors that
Yeah, this may have played a role.
And then we're very curious in your, educated opinion, right? We think that these were the things that really helped, and maybe this one didn't help so much, but that might be a more practical way to approach it.
Credit to what my colleagues are saying. I look at the issue of HR as a problem with I think that the idea of the grant, what I really like about it is that I realize that the grant may be 2 to 3 years, but I think the effect. The second year mentorship for doesn't necessarily end at the second year. The knowledge is not gone in year 3. And if I think we're building a recipe for improving teacher recruitment, then I hope that that's adding a little extra spice, a little extra salt, something to the recipe that makes it better, and perhaps I can't that is only going to add to our product.
But if a 2-year mentoring program is effective, maybe we need to pick up the tab.
Exactly.
And that's what this,
Yeah, but we need, if it's effective, we should be doing it.
And I hope that we're able to parse out that we think all of these ingredients help make a better process for us.
and that's the beauty of the grant, is we can try some of these things and get some data to support them, to see if they are initiatives we want to continue.
It's a great way to say it's a pilot,
Yeah.
Let's see if it works.
Yeah, I'm all about pilots.
I like it. I like it.
Any other questions?
I would just like to add, being in a classroom setting, as a teacher, knowing how the rubber hits the road, I want to compliment all of the thoughtfulness and detail that goes on into this plan, with your equity framework established and being implemented. I think this is
Anyone else? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion for adjournment?
We'll make that.
Second. Hold on.
Roll call. Director Acid.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I said yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Director Byers. Director Faulkner.
Yes.
Director Mueller.
Yes.
Vice President Petroff. Yes. President Cuneo.
Yes.
All right, thanks very much.